Welcome everyone, Dylan Gemelli here today with a brand new video for you. So today we're going to talk about how to effectively use Deca Durabolin and NPP. But before we get into that, I have to reiterate that I am not a doctor, so anything that I say in these videos is for your entertainment purposes only. What you do with this information is completely and utterly up to you, and I am not advising nor condoning you to use any of the things that we discuss whatsoever. So let's talk about how to effectively use Deca Durabolin and NPP, nandrolone phenylpropionate, which is just the short ester version of Deca Durabolin. Now, one of the biggest issues that I see with Deca Durabolin in terms of people complaining about it, saying that they are holding water, getting extremely shut down, etc., is that they run it too high. Look, Deca is actually extremely dry, one of the best compounds out there in terms of gaining size and keeping it clean and staying dry and not adding a ton of body fat and nasty size, etc., and really keeping side effects low. But the problem is misuse. Okay? You don't need more than 400 milligrams of Deca per week. You just don't. You can run it higher if you like, but just understand something. More is not always better, and oftentimes more means more problems. And if you run Deca higher and higher and higher, you might get a little bit more size, but you're probably not going to keep it, and you're probably going to have a bad experience. Okay? Just because you keep extending the dose does not mean that the results are going to be better. Just because you add more size doesn't mean that you're actually winning here. Because you could be adding more side effects and adding more problems, adding more water, etc., and making recovery extremely difficult. And guess what happens when recovery is extremely difficult and it takes you too long to recover? You don't keep your gains. And in fact, most often than not, you wind up worse off than when you actually started. So key number one is dosing. 300 to 400 milligrams is extremely effective. And it's going to mitigate the side effects down to a very low extreme. You start getting higher and higher and higher and higher, and like I said, all of these issues that people complain about, that's where that comes from. So my recommendation to you on dosing wise with Deca is 400 milligrams per week. Now, if you're going with NPP, you're going to probably be pinning every other day or every 3 days. My basic protocol for this is 100 milligrams every other day, which is going to put you right about 350 milligrams per week. You could bump it to 125, and you're going to be at about 425, 450 milligrams per week. You're getting on the higher end. 100 milligrams every other day is perfect. You run it with test prop, run them both 100 milligrams every other day, and that's just so ideal. All right? Now, in terms of cycle length, with NPP, look, you can run NPP just as long as Deca if you like. But pinning every other day is not exactly what most people call fun, okay? And it's, NPPs for people that kind of like to run shorter cycles. 8 to 10 weeks of NPP and test prop together is absolutely perfect. Now, Deca is an extremely long ester. So I generally tell people to go 14 weeks with it. You can go 12 weeks, so 12 to 14. But I see people running it like 20 weeks. Now you're getting into that extreme zone where you could be running into more problems. All right? You could be running into more shutdown, more suppression. And it's just something that you don't want to deal with. Now, Deca converts to estrogen at a much lower rate than testosterone. But you're still going to want to have an AI on hand. All right? You don't ever want to let estrogen get out of control. And then there's always the prolactin issue that a lot of people don't ever discuss, don't bring up, etc. Prolactin can increase with Deca Durabolin, which is not something that you want to happen. That can cause erectile dysfunction, lactating nipples, things like that. Things that you don't want. Now, this is another place, an area that's often scrutinized, misunderstood. In my experience over all of these years, seeing through blood work, etc., when you start getting over 300 milligrams of Deca per week or NPP, that's when you want to be, using Caber, which is also called Dostanex, or pramipexole. Now, when you start getting in that 300 and under range, I've seen plenty of people that have just simply used vitamin B6 at different varying doses, and that's something that you're going to have to play around with. I don't have an exact dose for everybody because some people are more sensitive than others, and some people don't need as much as others. So you're going to have to play around with that. But that is kept that in check and that issue in check without much worry or concern. But me personally, I always tell people, always have Caber or Promi on hand. Okay? If you don't, oftentimes, and especially Caber's more difficult to get. Please don't ask me in the description where to get it either. But it can be more difficult to get, and it can take time, and it's one of those things that you always have everything on hand before you start a cycle, no matter what. That's like one of the first golden rules of cycling. Now, the Promi dose is one to play around with as well, especially because a lot of people have terrible side effects with Promi. I'm going to do a separate video on both Promi and Dostanex so that you can understand them. All right, but Promi does bring about more side effects. Now, a lot of people say it's better at controlling prolactin, although Caber's quite good as well. But the easing into the dosing with Promi for some people is different, and I'm going to cover the whole protocol on that. Now, with Dostanex, 0.25 milligrams every 3 days is plenty on 400 milligrams. With quality Dostanex at that dose is plenty. If you're going to be one of those people that decides to run Deca or NPP higher in that 500, 600, 700 range, you're going to probably want 0.5 milligrams every 3 days. Like I said, it's not something that I recommend, but inevitably, I know there's plenty of people that are going to do it. It doesn't matter what I recommend or what others say. You're going to do what you want to do. So at the very least, attempt to mitigate those side effects as much as possible. Like I said, it's not the wisest thing in the world, but whatever. Now, lastly, test to Deca or NPP ratios. This is another topic of discussion where you're going to get arguments. You're going to have people go, well, this works better for me, and other people go, well, this works better for me. Well, guess what? That doesn't mean anything to the next person over, because they're different than you, just like I'm different than you. And so it's great to share experiences, but every single person's different. What I always recommend people to do is start with them equal. Okay, and that way you can kind of get a feel for them and see how you like it, because most people tolerate them being equal extremely well. I know a lot of people that prefer to run Deca a little bit higher than test, because oftentimes test can bring on more side effects running it too high. But then I've got people that say if they run test too low that they get extremely shut down and suppressed. So that's why I tend to keep them, most of the times when you see me lay out a cycle, if I don't have them equal, I'll have Deca like 350 and test 300. Me personally, I don't recommend test higher. It's not something that I recommend to others. I feel like that there's more issues with that than I see on the other end, and that's why I do that. But that's something that you have to play around with, and that's this beautiful thing called trial and error from each person to person. So those are the areas and avenues of, I guess, concern, or things that you need to be aware of. But remember, blood work, blood work, blood work. That's how you determine how you're responding to things. Pre-cycle, so you have a baseline. Mid-cycle, so you can see how you're reacting, and clearly post-cycle to see how you're recovering. So, that being said, www.icearms.com/forums. I'm also in the evolutionary forum as well as the elite fitness forum, and you can email me, dylan@icearms.com, and please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That being said, stay tuned for plenty more to come. Dylan Gemelli, signing off.